On today's show, we are breaking down the game of the strongest competitor in the entire 2025 NHL draft class, who just so happens to bring some elite playmaking ability as well, Carter Bear.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we're breaking down the game of potentially my favorite player to watch in the entire 2025 NHL draft. Carter Bear, an absolute dog. He constantly works hard, and we're going to dive into what makes him so special beyond just the raw work rate. There's so many habits and details and elite level tools and skills in his game that could elevate him to being one of the most suffocating top six forwards in the entire National Hockey League. He's an absolute pain to play against and can punish teams with his offensive abilities. So we'll be breaking down the overall tools in the first segment, as well as his profile, delving into the stats, how good his shot, passing, handling, physicality, all these elements are in his game. Then we'll move on in the second segment to look at the overall IQ and hockey sense and how his tools interact to form a cohesive projection to the NHL game. And finally, we'll wrap up the show in the final segment, looking ahead a little bit at our predictions of where he might go on draft day, the range, the potential team fits, what his NHL ceiling and floor are, and which NHL players have similar stylistic elements to Carter Bear. So without further ado, make yourselves comfortable, lean back, get something to drink, and let's just dive straight into the episode here. And for those who are unaware, Carter Bear is awesome. If you've not yet watched him play, he is incredible to watch in terms of the intensity, the ferocity, the will, and on top of that, all of the dynamic qualities. So let's delve into his profile here. Who is this player? Carter Bear is a 6 foot, 176 pound left shot forward. He can play at center or on the wing, and he's a November 4th, 06 birthday. So one of the older players in the draft among first round potential prospects. And on top of that, this season, he played in 56 games with the Everett Silvertips because he had an injury that we'll delve into a little bit more in the second segment. And in those 56 games this season, he scored 82 points, had 77 penalty minutes, and had 40 goals and 42 assists for 82 points in 56 games. That production is obscene. Obscene is the word I come back to. It is, it is insane level of production for a draft eligible talent. This season in the WHL among point per game scorers, Carter Bear came in 13th in the entire league, just behind players like Cole Reshny, Riley Height, Tija Ginla, Braden Yeager, Ben Kindle, as well as guys like Berkeley Catton, Gavin McKenna, and Andrew Crystal. So a lot of really high-end names ahead of him. And some players that I have ranked lower than Carter Bear this season among draft eligibles like Kindle and like Reshny, who are slightly ahead in terms of production, but in terms of projectable habits and pieces in his game, you're going to understand why Carter Bear is such a special player in this year's class. So let's talk a little bit of where he's finding himself in terms of draft projections and where the public is ranking him. He's ranked as high as 7th overall by Recruit Scouting, 8th overall at Elite Prospects, 12th overall in the overall average rankings that are out in the public, 15th by Bob McKenzie, and 24th by Craig Button. But you see a lot of 9th overall kind of rankings by Smart Scouting and Draft Prospects Hockey and Sam Cosentino and Bukala as well from over at Sportsnet, Jason Bukala. So a lot of rankings have him right there at the end of the top 10 or beginning of the teens. And I think that's very much the range that he has found himself all year long. But there perhaps is a little bit of a dock in terms of his overall draft stock because of that lacerated Achilles injury that he suffered late in the season. And he's already back skating, even though it only happened in March, which is insane. It was a partial laceration to his Achilles. But we'll talk a bit more about that in the second segment. But there is a bit of an adjustment down in terms of because of that injury and considerations of the risks of how that's going to affect and influence his game down the stretch. I personally am not concerned. I would keep him in that range. He's at 8th overall on my personal board. He's a player I've loved all season long, and overall, he's a guy that I think deserves a top 10 selection on draft day. But in terms of likelihood, potentially falls more in those early teens, first half of the teens, maybe middle teens as well, if he falls a little bit. But let's start off a little bit with the tools with Carter Bear, because there's a lot to get excited about with this player, and it all I think is built around the physical habits first and foremost. We do our skill ranking grades here by our elite prospects grading chart. It goes from a 1 to a 9 to evaluate each tool. An NHL baseline is kind of 5 grade, and it's down in the description down below if you want to have a peek at what each of those numbers kind of mean. But in terms of physicality, it is a standout strength, top 6 easy projection for the NHL, even though he's not the biggest, heaviest player. Carter Bear is 6 feet tall and 176 pounds, right? Like, he's not huge. However, because of the will, because of the physical habits, his understanding of leverage, playing inside contact constantly, and just being an absolute little like piranha, and being like just constantly seeking that contact. Like, he's really among the most physical players in this year's draft class. He has a 7 grade for us at Elite Prospects, and everything is kind of built around that physicality, and it influences so many aspects of his game. The playmaking, the passing ability is just as good, in my opinion, as well. Also, a 7 grade on our 9 point scale. Really stand out, borderline elite kind of playmaking ability. It was among the best in the WHL this season in terms of the nuances, manipulation, dragging players out of position, and being able to execute plays at the right moment. The intelligence, the timing, the composure, all of these things also feed that playmaking, but it's also supported by high-end passing mechanics. He's a very precise passer. He's able to thread needles and also release his passes with real pace. He's a player that I think, in terms of that passing ability, could drive offense in a top 6 capacity on a contending team in the NHL someday. And in terms of that projection, that's definitely a player that I would want on my team with a top 10 selection. But he might go in that like teen range as well because of the injury and because he's not the biggest guy in the world. And he's probably going to be a winger at the next level. These things might get him to drop a slot or two each individually. But still, with these elements to build around, I think that Carter Bear is a really special talent. Let's talk about the shot now. I think it's also above average. It's not as good as the playmaking, even though the goal tally being like just 2 goals shy of how many assists he logged this season might indicate that he's like a shoot first kind of player, but so much of that comes in the habits. He finds himself in dangerous areas around the net front. And yeah, he has a powerful, accurate, precise release. He's not the biggest threat to score from long range, but still a guy that, despite not being maybe like your trigger man on a power play, could work on a bumper roll or net front in tight where he's playing inside contact, which is where he wants to find himself too. But being able to be very versatile and being able to finish chances in tight, but also find really creative and accurate passes from that kind of dangerous area and playmaking and elevating his teammates in doing so. Also wanted to mention he's a Peguis First Nation player, so he's an Indigenous player from Manitoba. Was born and grew up in the Winnipeg area, which is also always awesome to see in terms of representation in hockey. And I mean, Carter Bear definitely plays the way that his name describes his personality. Right, he is an absolute bear on the ice, and in terms of embodying the spirit of that animal, I think that he certainly brings everything to the ice. So did want to highlight that as well. But let's move on to the handling skill. probably the weakest tool that he has, and it's still at least NHL average in terms of projection. He's not a player that's going to create a whole bunch of chances through his hands, but he's a guy that can solve individual problems as he encounters them. But it's really through his intensity, his intelligence, anticipation, his playmaking that he's able to solve problems on a routine basis rather than dangling through different lines of opposing defenses, but still a guy that I think has a projectable handling ability and can still improve that as well in the coming seasons. Moving on, we have to wrap things up here his skating ability. To me, this is also an NHL average projection, a 5 grade on our grading scale at Elite Prospects. And I think that the way that he moves around the ice, it's just pure will and desire. It's not mechanical giftedness. He's not the most fluid mover on the ice, but he just gets from A to B with so much pace and haste that he wins most races that he's in, even though he's facing better skaters in terms of like the mechanics, the fluidity, the crossovers. Carter Bear's stride can be a bit choppy, but he just forces his way up the ice. And he's also not the biggest, heaviest guy, so that also helps him in terms of covering bigger distances quickly. But he's going to have to work a bit on that skating in terms of opening more chances for himself as a playmaker at the professional level. That'll help translate that ability a bit. But he has so many compensatory habits and tools in his game that it's not a concern at all for me of how he moves around the ice. Because look, like a guy like Brendan Gallagher has a kind of similar style, but definitely leans more heavily towards goal scoring than playmaking. But at the same time, he is like a 3.5 or 4 level skater, gotten worse in the last couple seasons, certainly also with just like lower body injuries that he's faced. But he's never been an average skater in the NHL. He's has an ugly stride, not efficient, all these aspects. And Carter Bear's already more refined in quite a few of these categories. Players like this can make the NHL without having to rely on their skating to carry them up ice or to really fuel their game. So that wraps up the first segment as we have broken down the overall tools. In the next one, we're going to look at how things layer together, as well as why he's just like an absolute dog and the habits, the intensity, the motor, and everything that opens up for this player being so exciting and how that projects not just to the NHL game, but to the NHL playoffs. He is made for this kind of hockey. All that coming up after these messages from our sponsors at Locked On NHL Prospects. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances at monarchmoney.com. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at Monarch Money for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All righty, let's dig in a little bit to the habits and the hockey sense with Carter Bear, and this is as strong an element as any other in his game. He's highly intelligent, highly adaptable, so pacey in everything he does, but also the way he thinks and reads the game. He's a player that's made to think the game at the NHL level and beyond. He's a really, really intelligent player, and all of this flows through his motor, his breakneck pace, always applying pressure, always pushing the pace. He's a true play driver, not just in his on-puck abilities and getting the play forward and connecting play between teammates, but also in terms of creating chances, applying pressure on the forecheck and back check, and immediately pouncing on those loose pucks to create something down low in the offensive zone. He's just such a high motor player, the highest motor in this draft class, the most vicious, violent 6-foot player you're going to find in the draft. And overall, a guy I think that's just, he's made for the NHL playoffs. He really, really just raises his game when the stakes are higher. It was so clear that his injury broke him deeply because he missed the playoffs this season and he couldn't be there for his team. He couldn't support Everett in that playoff push. And it so clearly bothered him so much, but he still came to the rink. He supported his teammates. He was there, and he took it on as his duty and responsibility to do that, to still be able to lead while being injured and not being on the ice, to have an influence, to support his teammates and be there for his team, even though spending every minute and not being able to contribute on the ice was heartbreaking. So a player that just does everything for the team, even at personal sacrifice and cost. He's a guy that is going to be there for his team in any way that he's capable of. And that is the identity for this player, and it's why I've fallen in love with watching him play hockey. He plays the game like it's game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals every single shift after shift, period after period. Doesn't matter if it's the first game of the season or the last. Certainly, I mean, he ramps it up a little bit by the last game, but it's more like he goes from 120% effort to 140. This is a guy that's just able to give everything and more. He's able to always find those extra reserves of desire and energy and intensity, and these things are just so integral to how he plays the game. And I think it's going to make him such a projectable player. And there's so many player comps that we've been hearing as well this season, both internally at elite prospects and externally in the public, of Seth Jarvis. Like, this player is just made for this kind of hockey, or like a playmaking version of Logan Stankoven. This is the way that you have to approach the game to make an impact, even if your frame isn't the biggest. But again, the physicality is a clear strength in this player's game already, and he still has more filling out to do in his frame. So a guy that, with this intensity and this engagement, when you pair that with elite level awareness, anticipation, scanning frequency, constantly looking around the ice, great mental map of what his surroundings are, and being proactive, right? Like, intelligence isn't just habits and making the right reads and being in the right place all the time. It's about making the right decisions at the right moments, being able to crack open games by doing something special. This feeds into intelligence, like, certainly, right? Vision and creativity. These are all IQ related things and contribute to our hockey sense grade. And each of those elements is a massive strength for Carter Bear. He's so adaptable and creative. He's able to find solutions to the problems he encounters, but he also doesn't try to overcomplicate things. He's a straightforward player. And also, like, got this from an interview question in an interview conducted by Anthony Donati, the prospect Don, over on Twitter and YouTube. And a good friend of the podcast here. And there's a question that he asked, like, if I wanted to ask one. So the question that Carter Bear answered from me was about his inside playmaking game being among the very best in this year's draft class, if not the best, and asking what fuels that for him. And his answer was very straightforward. It was just, I want to make the right decision at the right time. The timing is so important here, right? And not forcing things, not trying to create something when it's not open, and being adaptable to doing what is available in front of you rather than having a preconception of what has to get done or what you want to get done, and just looking around, being aware and being opportunistic in that sense, and adding to it that he just wants to play the game the right way with intensity, being in the right place at the right time, certainly. But in terms of inside contact playmaking, just knowing that when you're going for pucks in, like, congested areas, you're going to have to work within contact and work leverage mechanics and be able to create within those tight spaces, even when it's uncomfortable. And he has that awareness. He has the pre-scanning habits to know where the opportunities lie in those situations, and he's able to execute those. So a very mature player in terms of how he approaches the game. And I think he's just going to make an NHL team incredibly happy on draft day, because he plays a playoff style. And to talk about the injury a little bit, I think it also paints a picture of his personality, not just in terms of how he comported himself during that rehab process, because this injury was a partial laceration of the Achilles. So it was a skate blade slash the back of his heel. Very, 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 very ugly, scary injury, right? Like, these are, like, among the worst injuries that you do not want to see in the game of hockey. And this happened in March. He is skating again. This player is able to double down and focus on what lies in front of him in the rehab process. He was just 100% dedicated to getting himself back healthy as fast as possible, and did that very clearly. I don't think I've seen a player return from a lacerated Achilles or anything related to that kind of injury in like even double the time that's taken Carter Bear to be back on his skates on the ice and moving with intensity and fluidity again. Like he hasn't played a competitive game, like the season was over, but still very impressive stuff there for Carter Bear in terms of embracing that adversity, pushing through it, and growing his own limits as well through what he faces and that things that are just outside of his control. So a player that I have a lot of respect for and how he plays the game and also approaches being an athlete in general and supporting his team and just playing the game the right way. Like every single shift, you know what you're getting from Carter Bear, and he has the ability to create something special. And I think those two things, when you combine them with the best motor in the draft class, just rampant physicality, high-end hockey sense, and borderline elite playmaking, that's a top 10 pick on paper, right? Like I think that's just a very special kind of player that every team should want to have in their lineups. But we'll see where it ends up going on draft day, and we'll be discussing that a bit more in the next segment. The predictions of where he goes on draft day and which NHL player comps make the most sense for Carter Bear. All that coming up after these messages from our sponsors at Locked On NHL Prospects. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, breaking down the game of Carter Bear of the Everett Silvertips. Let's start things off a little bit with his range on draft day. And we already prefaced this with where the public has him, but this is more my prediction of where he's actually going to go on draft day. What's the conceivable kind of range of picks that this player would get selected in? And I think the injury is going to scare a couple teams off. I think the fact that he's not over 6 feet tall is going to scare some teams off as well in that top 10. But as soon as you exit the top 10, I think that it's like open season for Carter Bear. And that's definitely his range between 10 or 11th overall to 20th overall. I don't think he should be dropping further than 20th with the way he plays the game. The fact he's already skating again from that injury seemingly isn't holding him back too much. With these elements and everything else we've been talking about here on today's show, I think that 10 to 20 range is the sweet spot of where he's going to fall on draft day. My personal board currently, it's not finalized, but currently he's sitting at 8th overall. That return from injury has settled some frightening doubts I had in terms of what the impact of a lacerated Achilles could have on his projection and overall how he's going to progress over the coming seasons. But the fact that he's skating again in May is utterly insane, and I just think that this is a player that could drive a top 6 line on a competing roster, and that's not a profile that you really get outside the top 10 very often. So he's definitely a kind of player that I see it being worth a top 10 selection and being in that conversation in a redraft. But which teams are going to be good fits for this player in terms of stylistic, what the teams actually need, what they value, and what they want to add to their lineup to build in terms of their roster construction? And there's 3 teams here I wanted to highlight. First and foremost, I think the best fit almost is the Montreal Canadiens. This is the player I've had the Montreal Canadiens selecting in both of the mock drafts I've done after the lottery. I think he's just a perfect fit for what the Canadiens value, what they need. Brendan Gallagher is not going to be playing forever. He had a bit of a resurgence this year, scoring, I believe it was 20 goals, and being quite a big contributor in terms of depth scoring and possession and play driving offense for the Montreal Canadiens this year. But he's getting older. His body's still breaking down a little bit. I think Carter Bear would be the perfect player to take up that mantle as a top 6, high intensity, outworks everyone on the ice, but also brings special offensive qualities to change and break open games when you need him to, clutch in the playoffs. All these factors, I think he could be the perfect player to take over the torch from Brendan Gallagher with the Montreal Canadiens, while also bringing a level of game-changing playmaking to the equation, which the Habs could certainly use a little bit more of in their top 6. I think he's a perfect fit, and if he's available for the Habs, I would love to see him don the 3 colors, the blue, red, and white of the Montreal Canadiens. But moving on, we have the Vancouver Canucks. I also think this is a great fit. They would have seen him play a lot. I mean, playing in the WHL, of course, the Canucks would have gotten quite a few viewings of him this season. And I think that he also embodies a lot of qualities that the Canucks need more of in their lineup. He brings bite, he brings pace and intensity, but also potentially game-breaking playmaking ability. And after losing JT Miller, they definitely need more of that. They can't just lean completely on players like Quinn Hughes from the blue line to create every single chance offensively. And a guy like Carter Bear could certainly help bear that burden. In terms of creating offense in the offensive zone in a top six capacity down the stretch. But last but not least, we have the Detroit Red Wings, a team that always loves selecting hardworking players who play the game the right way, are projectable talents, will probably be playing within 2 seasons, and also have some special elements in their offensive toolkits that could be used to really move up a lineup and be a true top six rather than a middle six kind of piece. I mean, last year they went out and selected Michael Brandzeg-Newgard. The year before that, it was Marco Kasper. I think you get a similar kind of, or even better, intensity and engagement from Carter Bear than in those players. But on top of that, you get a level of playmaking brilliance that none of them can really contend with. And he also has the best tool among any of those players with that playmaking, in my opinion, in terms of offensive creation. And on top of that, also probably the smartest player in terms of processing speed and pace and just being able to blend all of those tools together and being adaptable constantly. He has a higher ceiling than any of those guys. And I think he'd be a great fit for what Detroit always values and what they always love going for in the first round, while also bringing some elements that they could use more of in their lineup. But let's wrap things up here with his NHL ceiling, floor, and player comps. Let's kick things off with the player comps. And there's 3 names I outlined here, 2 of which I've already mentioned in this episode. Seth Jarvis being the really clear and obvious one to me in terms of constant pace, that high-end WHL draft year production, being able to drive offense from the wing and just being a perfect complement and working off of elite thinkers of the game. I mean, Jarvis has been fantastic in Carolina alongside players like Sebastian Aho who think the game at such a high level, and being able to just work in those spaces, playing those support routes, being able to chip in not just with goal scoring, but also playmaking skill and constant pace, forechecking, backchecking, defensive responsibility. These are all things that Carter Bear brings in spades as well. On top of that, just ceaseless intensity and physicality that Jarvis brings. But beyond that, you have a playmaking version of a Brendan Gallagher that I think is also a conceivable kind of upside. Maybe slightly like lower ceiling than guys like Seth Jarvis, for instance, but still a player that would make a massive difference in like a second line capacity long term for whichever team drafts him. And I think that kind of upside, if you can get that outside the top 10, you better be sprinting to the podium to select it because, Carter Bear's a pretty special talent, and there aren't many players that have as many special elements as Carter Bear outside the top 5 of this year's class. There's just so much diversity in what he brings to the ice, and that adaptability, being able to mold his game to whichever situation that requires him to do, and also being able to mold his game and channel his strengths in whichever direction that the team that drafts him needs him to, whether that be leaning a bit more on goal scoring or playmaking. He has adaptability in that sense of what he's going to refine down the stretch. And that moldability as a draft eligible prospect is also a very enticing thing for NHL teams. That means that his ceiling is that of a top 6 spark plug who brings high-end playmaking and play-driving ability. I think he's going to be a tremendous possession player with really great metrics in terms of expected goal percentage and Corsi and shot share. Any of these things, I think that Carter Bear is going to really excel at. And on top of that, he's also a fantastic player getting play from the boards to the middle of the ice, which you need from your high motor wingers to be able to get the puck from the periphery to the dangerous areas. Almost a bit like Tisha Ginla in terms of resisting physical contact and being able to just drive into the middle lane with power and ferocity, a good leverage, low center of gravity, quick little strides as well, crossovers to get around individual opponents. He's such a great player. I love watching him play. I hope my enthusiasm is coming across in this episode because it's just been there every single time I've watched him play this season. And whichever team lands him on draft day, I think is going to be elated with what he's able to give back to them in the coming decade and beyond. I'd love to hear, though, from you in the comments down below. Where would you rank Carter Bear? Is he a guy that you'd rank like 4th overall, or is he a player whose injury scares you, the frame scares you, and maybe he's like a 25 to 30 range player on your board? I'd love to hear about your opinions down below. And if you've watched him live this season, I'd also love to hear what your impression was. How was it to watch him live? I'm out on the East Coast in Montreal, so I haven't watched him live this season, unfortunately. But if you have, what were your impressions? And did you maybe get some details that don't come through on video, like how vocal he is on the ice in terms of commanding his teammates and taking control in that facet? I would love to hear from your perspectives down below. If you're watching on YouTube, of course, please do like and subscribe. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers here on the podcast. And for your second listen, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. That's everything from me today. I'm your host, Sebastian High. Thank you so much for listening as always, and I hope to catch you tuning in again very, very soon.